thank you everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, which is the top 5 workforce management myths. It's going to be an exciting webinar, some quite interesting facts I think we're going to share with everyone. So I'm delighted to be joined by our Mythbusters. That is Penny Reynolds. Penny is the chief of the call center school. Penny, does that make you a headmistress?
I believe that's a good explanation, Jonty.
And we're also joined by Chris Dealy and also Dean Couchman from Injixo, who are going to help us debunk 5 myths of workforce management. As we said before, we'll then follow on to doing some top tips from the audience. We're also going to take a few questions as we go through where it applies. So if you've got any questions, put those into the question box would be great. So what I want to do is I'd like to start now with just doing a poll and just like to explore from you all how you measure service level. So be interested to know whether you measure service level predominantly daily, weekly, monthly, or on an interval. So if you just like to tick the ones that most apply to you, just like to put that into the box, and I think it's going to be quite fascinating to see what the outcome of this is likely to be. So I'm just going to close the poll here and share the results with everyone. Looks like the most common answer here, Penny, 82% is daily, with a sort of spread of people on weekly, monthly, or interval. I would have expected monthly to be higher than that.
Well, I'm not surprised to see the daily one so high, and that's really how we're going to start out our talk. So
okay,
I'm glad to see the poll supporting the story I was about to tell.
Very good, very good. Well, I'll just hide that, and I'll pass the baton across to you, Penny, and I'd like to introduce our first of our Mythbusters, Penny Reynolds from the call center school in Nashville.
Well, great. Good morning and hello, everyone. I'm happy to be joining you from the other side of the pond this morning. And we wanted to share today some myths about workforce management. So we're going to begin by introducing the 5 myths very, very quickly. And we're going to spend just a few minutes on each one of these, about 5 minutes on each one of these. So we're going to begin by talking a little bit about service level measures. And we'll come back to those poll results in just a moment. Secondly, we'll be talking about how you accumulate and account for shrinkage as you figure out the schedules you need for your staff. Third, we're going to talk a little bit about labor cost and overtime in particular. Fourth, we're going to talk about the best configuration of schedules, ones that both give you maximum coverage as well as hopefully maximum satisfaction for your staff, and why typical ones may not be doing either one of those things. And then finally, we'll take a look at workforce management software and some of the myths behind it about how expensive and difficult it is. So those are the myths. Let's get started with that first one. Jonty gave you a poll about how do you measure service level, and the most common answer was daily at 82%, and that's really what we see around the world. But I want to give you something to think about here about is that the way you should be focusing on your service level measures? It is the most common way. Only 1/3 of you said we measure by interval. 33% of you said that. So what I want to talk about is let's just take a look at these measures and how should you be looking at and reporting service level statistics. So in this chart you see here, we have 12 hours of the day, how many calls arrived in each hour, the percent of calls that represents for the day, and then the resulting service level. And for this particular organization, the goal was a daily goal of 80% in 20 seconds. And if you add up that last column and divide by the 12 hours, the average for the day was 82%. So if we showed this to most call centers and I said, how'd you do yesterday? And here are your numbers. Most call centers would say, we did great, 82%, our goal was 80. We were a fabulous day yesterday. But if you take a closer look at those numbers, I mean, it's really not a great story. The first thing we want to look at is just taking an average of those numbers at the end really gives us a skewed kind of picture because it's counting the 100% that you got in the first couple of hours of the day when you didn't really have as many calls with the 60 and 70% where most of your calls came in. So you might say, well, what if we do a weighted average and we take into account that we're weighting service level in those busier hours more heavily? That's better, but still it's going to come out to about 78%. You may say, well, that's good. That's still pretty close. We did okay for the day. But if you look at those numbers and if I ask you how many intervals of the day did you meet your goal? Typically, when I ask that question in a class, we go through and we add up anything that's over 80%. And so you may say, well, we met that 7 or 8 of the intervals. Well, did you really? So did you really meet your goal in those first 2 intervals of the day, the first 4 for that matter? Well, you met it and then some. You met it and went over. But the problem there is by going over and being overstaffed, in those hours, you're utilizing your staff and your labor, and then you don't have enough to go around when the majority of calls come in. So most call centers have this peak and valley kind of situation, and it's nearly impossible to get exactly the right number every single interval of the day, but that is indeed our goal. And what you're getting with a service level measure at the end of the day is an average that kind of balances all those things out. And it's kind of like having your feet in the oven and your head in the freezer. Your average body temperature might be okay, but it doesn't say anything about how uncomfortable those 2 extremes are. And when we think about how uncomfortable the extremes are in a call center, overstaffing is uncomfortable. We're paying needless dollars for staff. They're unproductive. The other end of that spectrum is very uncomfortable too, with not enough people to go around. Service level is poor, our callers are waiting a long time, the staff that are there are crazy busy, call after call after call, and it's costing us money if we're footing the telephone bill. So all I'm saying here is that if you're only looking at that at the end of the day, you may be missing out on important numbers that show you we're over by 3 here, we're under by 4 here, and if you're not looking at that and measuring it and having those metrics in front of you every single day, it's kind of removing some of the information you need to get better. So I would urge you, if you don't have a measure in place for service level by interval, what percent of the intervals for the day did we hit our goal? And by hitting the goal, I don't mean hitting it and going over by any amount. I mean, let's say if our goal is 80%, I'd like to see how many intervals of the day you were within 75 to 85. And anything above or anything below doesn't count. And so what you're shooting for is getting that number to improve and improve and improve by a manipulation of your scheduling plan. But if you don't have the interval measures in place, you're never going to have the information to know how to get better. So for those of you that are just doing daily or weekly or monthly, think about adding that interval measure in place. And for the 33% that we're doing it, good for you. Okay, let's move on to the next myth. We're going to talk a little bit about shrinkage here. It's very important that once we understand how many bodies and chairs we need, a base staff requirement, that we take that number but we inflate it by shrinkage. The percent of time that we're paying people but they're not available to do the work. So first of all, very important that we track it by all categories and we're not going by some bizarre industry standard for shrinkage or what we hope shrinkage is, but that you're factoring in and you're tracking and measuring it very, very carefully. So like I said, shrinkage is basically the paid time for which staff are not available to take calls. And we have to inflate our bodies and chairs number with that shrinkage to get a scheduling pool or the number available to be scheduled. So it's really important that we track this properly. We have a poll, I believe, here, Jonty, don't we, about shrinkage and what everyone is tracking currently. So
indeed, we do. We're going to go to a poll. And the poll is, what do you include in your calculation of shrinkage? Just going to launch that now. The answers are meetings, training and coaching, breaks, off-phone work, or unexpected lost time. So hopefully those are coming through there. While we're doing getting the votes in, Penny, we've had some comments back on the intervals. Scott has said on the chat room, we analyze intervals for the day, each day here. The measures are in place. We don't just do daily, and agree with Penny what she is saying. So good agreement there, good. Penny. Yeah. And Andrew has said a question: wouldn't a weighted average by interval help? So rather than just doing a weighted average, would that give a better picture?
Yes, a weighted average is always best. So you are giving more weight to the times where you're getting more calls. So weighted averaging is best. But once again, we see some organizations that are doing the weighted average, so they're almost there, but just doing it at the end of the day. So it's really, and in that case, even if you're doing a weighted average, you can have some hours of the day that are horrible and others that are, not so bad, but the weighted average is giving you a little bit closer picture. But until you start breaking down and looking at how many intervals of the day did we hit the target, you're really not going to get the information you need to, number one, understand really what service you're delivering to your customers, and most importantly, information to fix things and get better.
Okay, we've now got the results of the poll in. So it looks like quite a sort of wide agreement on a number of the ones there. Training and coaching seems to be in shrinkage for most people, as are breaks and meetings. Only 65% have off-phone work, and 51% is unexplained lost time. Lloyd has said it's interesting to plan unexpected lost time. It's an excellent idea, he says there. So sort of quite a variety on the variety there, Penny.
Okay, good. Well, let's go back to the slides here now and take a look at how we account for that shrinkage. So it looks like everyone's pretty much tracking the same thing. Our smallest number is that unexplained lost time, and that's an important one. We know we need to track.
Can we just get your slides up on the screen, Penny? We don't seem to have them.
Okay.
Let me just change. Okay, that's it. That's
okay.
Fine. Great.
You see it? Do we see me now? Okay.
It does.
Yeah, so for the categories, it's common to track the meetings, the training and so on, but really important to grab that last one, that unexplained time. It's one of those, we know they're in the building today. We've seen them here, but they're not at their desk. They're not logged in. They're not in the break room. They're not in a meeting. They're not in a training session. Where are they? And for some centers, that could be just a couple of minutes a day, but in others, it could be quite a bit of time. So really important that we track that one too.
And Penny, on that, would you recommend that all of those ones that we had on the screen are included in shrinkage?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, everything needs to be included that takes people away from being available to answer a phone. So whatever it is, and it's not to say that this is not productive time, that they shouldn't be in a meeting. Of course, they need to be off the phone for coaching. Absolutely, they need breaks. There's other off-phone work to do. These are all reasonable and needed categories. Just important that we track them all, but one that sometimes gets sort of lost because they shouldn't be in that unexplained, we can't find them category. Sometimes doesn't get tracked, and for some call centers that can be significant. So in the example we're showing here is just what one shrinkage example might look like. So here we're just looking at kind of a U.S. example of only 10 days paid time off a year. So the other 50 weeks we're tracking the other categories of paid breaks and meeting, training, off-phone time. In the unexplained category here, we're putting in 15 minutes a day. But you can see how that adds up with the number of hours when we look at an annual basis. And so the total hours compared to 2,080 that we're paying here, 52 weeks times 40 hours a week, that's a shrinkage of 26%. Now, I think we're all on track with saying, yes, we haven't really bumped up into a myth yet. Everybody knows these are important to track. We should track them carefully and calculate. The myth comes along about how we apply that shrinkage sometimes. And we see some call centers making a simple math mistake here, but it's an important math mistake. So it seems logical that if you say need 90 bodies and chairs and your shrinkage is 26%, well, wouldn't you just increase your 90 bodies and chairs by 26%? That seems like pretty logical math, but it's actually incorrect. So if you do that, you'll see the math step at the bottom. If we do 90 multiplied by an additional 26%, that comes up to 113. And if anybody has a calculator handy and you do 113 minus 26%, you don't end up with 90 people on the phones. So the correct approach is up on top there. We take our bodies and chairs, the base staff required, we actually divide that by the productive percentage. So if 26% is lost to shrinkage, you do have them available the other 74% of the time. So 90 people, or bodies and chairs, 90 requirements, divided by 74% productive time gives you the number of people you need to have available to schedule, so that when it shrinks by 26%, you do end up with 90 people on. So that was the myth there, is that we just increase it by that much shrinkage, and there's actually a little bit different math step that should happen there. So that's kind of an easy one. Not so much a myth as a math mistake. Okay, let's move on to myth number 3, which has to do with labor costs. We're going to talk about labor here just for a moment. And a common assumption across the board is that certainly we want to minimize overtime costs. So we're going to take a look at that. But before we do, let's do a poll, Jonty, and ask our group about their use of overtime.
Okay, yeah. The question we are going to do is, what percentage of your labor cost is overtime? The answer is less than 10%, 10 to 19%, 20 to 29%, 30 to 49%, and over 50%. So be interested to see the answers on that. We've got a couple more questions on calculation of shrinkage. Should weekends be included in shrinkage, and should you factor annual holidays into shrinkage as well? Penny, have you got a view on those?
Yeah. Well, if you have weekend coverage, obviously it's one of your work days. Yes, absolutely, weekend time. In terms of factoring in holidays, we tend to think about shrinkage as long-term and short-term. So the long-term shrinkage goes in, and that's where you're factoring in your paid time off days and holidays and all those sort of things. And if you're then paying time and a half for work and so on, that all needs to be factored into the shrinkage picture. So we blend that in typically as a longer-term shrinkage. And then the other things we're thinking about are, well, what's happening during the day, this break that we have to go to, or this unexplained time. So generally it gets built in as two different categories, but yes, we do have to account for that because we're paying them, but they're not available for work.
And Chris, here's a question for you. For certain workforce management systems, Craig writes, your shrinkage figure should only be non-work time that is not already scheduled into the employer's calendar to avoid double counting.
Absolutely, it's vital that you do avoid that double counting. And when we do a weekly web demo of our system, I can't resist mentioning that, every Friday 11 o'clock, and that's one of the things that we point out during that demo. It's very easy to make that mistake, but it's vital that you pay attention to that.
So shrinkage should only be the stuff that's not already scheduled, effectively.
Correct.
Okay, well, I'm now going to share the results of the poll as regards the percentage of overtime. 64% of less than 10%. About a quarter have got about 10 to 20%. 12% at 20%, and we've got a small number over 30% overtime there. So quite a spread there. Quite a spread there, Penny. I think you're going to be now taking us through some of the myth about overtime. So, Penny, across to you.
Okay. get the screen back here. Yes, so what we want to do is talk about overtime. The thought is, well, we absolutely want to avoid it. I've been in several situations where you look at objectives and it's like minimize overtime, minimize overtime. And I mean, it is more expensive than base labor costs, of course, so we want to carefully control it. But occasionally, it's not a bad thing. So let's take a look at this. So we're going to do some very quick calculations about labor costs. And I'm going to, pardon me if I blurt dollars out instead of pounds or euros. So I'll try to remember to stick to pounds here. So let's assume we have an hourly wage rate, and here we're going to use $8.50 as our base wage. We have an amount for overhead, which is basically national insurance, some of the other benefits that we pay. So it's that additional padding above and beyond the hourly wage. And the paid for annual leave, bank holidays, and so on at 12%. So we're going to use those three to calculate first the cost of quote-unquote normal time. So we have the $8.50. We increase that by the 30% for our overhead costs, and by another 12% for those other allowances. So we have a cost of $12.38 for just normal time. That's our hourly wage rate. Yours may be higher, lower, just again, just a sample here. In most cases, when we pay overtime, it's time and a half. In some cases, it could be a little bit less than that. Sometimes it can be double the cost, but in this example, we're going to use time and a half, which is the most common, I think. It certainly is here in the U.S., and I think in the UK as well. So we're going to multiply that by 1.5 times. But for the rest of this, we don't have to factor in, we're not paying them additional health care costs or anything else. We do have to pay some of the additional costs, but it's not the full 30% here. So in some of the calculations we've done, it's about 13% additional, but not the 30%.
I think that's based just on the national insurance contributions in the UK,
yeah,
Penny.
Yeah, the 13.8.
Yeah.
Okay, so the cost of overtime is more expensive. So we have here $14.51. So we want to avoid that, right? Well, it depends. So what we want to do is we want to look at the adverse cost. So 3 different wage rates we could be paying here in 3 different situations. The first one is it's just normal time, just your basic wage rate, and you're staffed and you need them there during that time. So they're there, you're paying them an hourly wage, and they're giving you an hour's worth of work. So in that case, you're even, and the adverse cost is 0. Hours pay for an hour's work. There are some instances, if we are improperly scheduled, where you have someone scheduled, but your call volume has dropped down at certain hours, so you're paying them to be there, but there's not much work to do, so they're sitting idle. So in that case, you're paying them the $12.38, but you're getting basically no work, so the entire cost is an adverse cost. We compare that to the adverse cost of overtime, where yes, you're paying more money for them to be there, the $14.51, but you're getting an hour's worth of work out, the $12.38 value. So the adverse cost is only the $2.13. So the point we want to make here is that in some instances, it's better to understaff it a little bit and pay for overtime rather than overstaffing and having staff sit idle, which is a much higher adverse cost. In this case, $12.38 versus $2.13. So in this case, it's 6 times more expensive to have staff sitting around idle than it would have been to have understaffed it, assuming you have an overtime capability, both willingness to work overtime as well as that budget. So it's just something to think about. I'm not saying, hey, go out there and start offering overtime to everyone. No. I mean, the ideal thing, as I said earlier, is to get exactly the right number of people every single interval of the day. So you've got that first one. All you want is base time and you want it occupied. That's the ideal world. But with our up and down volume in the contact center, we can't always make that work. So as you're juggling with overstaffing and understaffing, I see a lot of call centers want to play it safe and have plenty of people in place. And you know, to some extent, we can find maybe other work for them to do once the call volume drops, or maybe we can offer them time off, you know, to leave before their shift is over, and you know, send them home and not pay them. But in some cases we can't, and so we're stuck with that idle time cost, which is very, very expensive. So it once again points to the need for very, very precise scheduling so that this doesn't happen. Okay, and that brings us to our next myth, which is all about schedules.
And I think that we're just getting some feedback from the audience that your idle time and overtime, good point, says Car, about idle time and overtime. We're getting quite a number of questions on shrinkage. We'll just hold those back for a short while. And if anyone wants to join in the discussion, this discussion started to kick off in the chat room, which is at callcenterhelper.com/chat. So if anyone wants to answer any of those questions, the chat room is a good place to do that. Back to you.
And we'll be joining the chat room after the session today, so we can continue some of those discussions there. And I believe we have time built in towards the end for more questions too, so we will come back and address some of those before the session closes. But let's move on to myth 4, which is all about schedules. So the thought is that everyone wants to work a 9-to-5 schedule, right? And there's some thought that we're going to maximize our coverage this way and employee satisfaction. But the problem is, with the out-of-control workload that we have in contact centers, there are days where we get more calls than others. Many of you get many more calls on Monday than other days of the week. There are certainly hours of the day that we get more calls than others. So the question is, how can we get more coverage on those hours or days where there are more work hours? And the fact is, we can't do it very well if we're using traditional 9-to-5 schedules. So really, I mean, everywhere in the workplace this is true, but especially in the contact center, we have a real challenge where our workload looks something like this gold line here. We have maybe a peak mid-morning and then a bigger peak in the afternoon. It drops off in the middle of the day. And if we think about this as building schedules, like building with Lego blocks, the more and different pieces and sizes you have, the better able you are to build lots of different models. And that's what we want to think about as we build schedules. The second picture is much nicer in the sense that if we've got many smaller ones and different sizes, we can group these together and really build something that fits our demand curve. But it takes some creative scheduling to do that. So it's really nice if you have some of those smaller schedules to place, and you can place them wherever you want. So obviously part-time is a great, not all of your schedules being part-time, but those organizations that adopt more part-time staff, and I know that there are some downsides. You know, it may be more difficult to get them in for training. We hear there's more, you know, turnover or attrition with part-time staff. There's not as much of the culture, and so on and so on and so on. But for scheduling flexibility, you know, part-time can really assist you with getting those small pieces that you need to build your schedule model. Even if you have all full-time staff, there are lots of ways to, in this case, we're looking at building a 40-hour a week. So whether yours is, your week is a 40-hour week or 37.5 or 36 or whatever it might be, there's lots of different ways to come up with 40 hours. So yes, one way is 5 8-hour shifts, but you know, your work doesn't come in that way. So if you have some days where you're trying to extend coverage at the end of the day, how do you get that extra 2 or 3 hours of coverage? Well, many call centers have gone to at least some of the schedules being 4 10-hour shifts or 3 10-hour and 2 5-hour. One very popular schedule we're seeing more and more in call centers, and in the U.S., some states can do it and some can't, but it's called a slant schedule. So with more calls occurring on Monday, You work a 10-hour workday on Monday, 9 on Tuesday, 8 on Wednesday, 7 on Thursday, 6 on Friday. So you're sort of building through the week to that, almost a half day on Friday. And not everybody works that, but there are a few selected individuals who it fits their personal lives that they'd really love to do that, and it really helps match the workforce to the workload, so it's both efficient and effective in terms of coverage, as well as something that employees really want to work. So the key here is flexibility. The ideal world is to have a software tool that can just run and show you lots of schedule possibilities, and then you can take those and go out to the staff and say, this would give us the best coverage. Is anybody willing to work 3 9-hour days and 2 6.5s, or whatever the case may be? But the key here is that we want flexibility. Split shifts, for example, great way to get coverage, and those can even be incorporated into the work day. We're finding that, and we were discussing this actually as getting started with the seminar, that it's called the workout schedule or the fitness schedule. There are a couple of call centers that we viewed where they're trying to get that coverage for the peak in the morning, the peak for the afternoon. They don't need people there in the middle of the day. They didn't want to send them home or whatever, but they incorporated a fitness schedule where they gave them a 2 or 2.5 hour break in the middle of the day, plenty of time to have their lunch, but also go work out and get back. And they loved that, and one call center even paid for the gym membership down the street in order to do that. So that's an example of a split shift, a schedule that you wouldn't think anyone would want to work, but it worked for the company and it worked for these individuals. So that's just one example. So I believe we have, I wanted to kind of open things up here and ask the audience for some of your scheduling ideas and what's worked for you. So Jonty, I'm going to turn it back to you now to get that question out.
Got the question go up on the screen now, which is, what schedule types do you use? We're going to drill down a bit more onto scheduling. So do you use flexible schedules, part-time, annualized hours, split shifts, or consistent start time? So just like to drill there. If you've got anything that doesn't appear on this list, you can put that into the question box or into the chat room. So just like to vote on there. We did have a question in from Richard about shrinkage, and Richard asked, we also include absences such as sickness into shrinkage, and asked the question, is this right? That's been answered by, I think it was Andrew on the chat room, who said, yes, it is right to include sickness in the shrinkage factors. So just going to close the results up on the screen. Dean, do you have a guess of which you think is going to be the most popular schedule on there?
From my experience, I'd expect to see possibly more flexible schedules and possibly some consistent start times, but definitely I'd expect split shifts to be at the bottom of the league as such.
Okay. Well, not quite then, as you would have expected. Certainly, flexible schedules come very near the top. Part-time very high, as is consistent start times. Split shifts actually was higher up. 23% of our audience are using it. Only 13% using annualized hours, which I think is one way of certainly dealing with overtime. What I'd like to do now is just drill down this a little bit, and I'd like to ask a question of you. What is the most unique or most creative schedule that you operate? So if you'd like to type your answers into the question box, what is the most unique or most creative schedule that you operate? And,
yeah, we might want to ask too. I mean, the split shifts, I'm surprised to see 23%. That's pretty high. It used to be a schedule that, ooh, no one's going to want to work that. We're seeing much more adoption of split shifts here in the U.S. as the percentage of at-home workers grows. So it's not something that you want to ask someone to drive into the contact center and do, but if they're working from home, it's certainly reasonable and expected for that kind of thing. So I'd also be interested to see how many of our audience members are using at-home staff, which gives you a whole built-in flexibility for scheduling.
Okay, we've got some of the answers into our most unique schedule. Also be interested just to hear what people find is the most successful schedule. So Mark has said term time is something they use in their contact center. He said it's not that unique, but they find it quite useful. Caroline has said school hours, so I guess scheduling around that. James uses reserve shifts within rotas. I'm not quite sure how that would how that works. James, if you could perhaps put some explanation on that. Andrew has said we schedule on a 30-minute basis and allow agents to pick up individual intervals, and they must meet a total number. Go to a few on the chat room. If you are not already logged into the chat, it's at callcenterhelper.com/chat. Scott says split shifts are really beneficial to the call center here. No one contracted to them, but they often get staff to work them, which is quite interesting. Mark has said unique scheduling is something they've used. He says I've moved breaks and lunches around break and then lunch at the end of the day. So, for example, agents leave the building an hour earlier as it was quieter. Penny, that's quite a nice.
Well, I've actually seen that one before as well, Jonty. I've come across that one quite often, and the one thing I've always found with that is normally by doing that you sometimes breach HR policies though, with working time directives, display screen equipment, safety standards, because you're not giving them the breaks within the relevant time spans. That's the only risk with that one, but it's if you do it properly, it works very well.
Yeah, Marco has got one here saying we ask in particular students to stay on later. I guess if they're going busier into the evening, that would work. Scott has got another unique scheduling, and that's around getting sessional staff to put in for hours where I need them, as long as they're flexible. They may work in 1 week, say 8 till 4, 10 till 6, 2 to 10, 11 till 7, 5 to 5, and DODO. I'm not sure quite what that one refers to. And we've also got, Carl has said seasonal scheduling. I use seasons for scheduling, and it very much depends on demand. So quite a range of different schedules there. I think I'm going to type that all up and do an article on the different types of scheduling that people
Good idea.
People have.
Just I think one of the keys is just so many of these things require flexibility on the part of the employees, and I think if you can incent them to give you more flexibility, to say, can you start at a different start time on Tuesday versus Wednesday versus Thursday, that can help the fit of schedules for the day. And so it may be that not everybody can do that with their personal needs and whatever, but if you have a few that can give you that flexibility, you just want to find some way to reward them for that. So whether it's, they get first pick of schedules, or they get to select their vacation weeks first, or, if there's a 30-minute window where you find yourself overstaffed, take an extra 15 minutes for a break or something. So those people that are giving you the flexibility, finding a way to reward them somehow related to schedules is very useful. So Jonty, I think we're going to actually we're going to start passing things over to Chris here in a minute instead of me on the screen controls. So if you want to pass that over to him, and that's going to take us to our next myth. All these things we're talking about related to schedules is much easier, quite frankly, if you have a tool at hand to do all this. So it's one thing if you're moving colored index cards around on your dining room table to figure out your schedules, which is the way I've seen it done for many people, or Excel spreadsheets. It works up to a certain point, but at some point this is all so much easier if you have a tool in place. So everyone says, well, sure, we'd like one, but the thought has been for a very long time that, well, sure, we'd like to have one, but workforce management is expensive and it's difficult, and gosh, we don't want to get IT involved, and that's hard. And but you know, that's becoming quite a myth these days. So I'm going to turn it over to Chris to kind of debunk this last myth for us.
And just before we do that, what I would like to do is just do a final poll, which is, what do you use to forecast and schedule staff? So just be very interested to know what you're using for forecasting and scheduling. The answers we have here are spreadsheets for forecasting, spreadsheets for scheduling, an on-site workforce management, a hosted workforce management, or homegrown applications. So if you'd just like to vote, you can vote on more than one. So if you'd just like to vote on those that apply, just be interested to see the results. Just expecting a couple more ones to come in here, and I'll just share the results with everyone. So what we're seeing is still a very large proportion of people using spreadsheets. 60% for forecasting, 54% for scheduling, 43% use on-site workforce management, 13% using hosted workforce management, which is certainly quite a jump forward, and 8% on homegrown applications there. So certainly looks like workforce management's certainly not as widely deployed as I would have expected. Does that do those results surprise you, Chris?
They don't really, Jonty, to be honest. I'm always amazed by what can be done with Excel by a competent practitioner. And when faced with the traditional expense of a workforce management system, it's a very attractive option. It doesn't surprise me. I am encouraged to see the take-up of hosted workforce management in that poll. It's a little higher than I was expecting. So we've been providing cloud workforce management for just over 2 years now. So we've got over 50 customers. So I think it's definitely the place to be.
Wonderful.
Sorry, John, you go ahead.
Do you want to take us through the debunk of this myth?
I will certainly do so. So picking up on Penny's point, the myth that goes around is that, as she said, workforce management software can be expensive and also IT heavy. You're installing some serious software in your own company, on your network, and this can be a big project for our friends in the IT department. And I have to say that, in fact, traditional on-premises workforce management software that you install on a server or servers in your own environment can work out very expensive because there's a number of sources of cost that you need to think about. Not only is there a big software license fee that's typically paid at the start as a capital expense, as our colleagues in the finance department refer to it, a big lump of money that goes out at the start. You've got to think about the hardware to run it on, which is another capital expense, and the ongoing IT costs to maintain that hardware and provide backups and so on. When you're initiating a workforce management installation, there's usually a heavy project for IT, so actually commissioning the servers and connecting them up and all this kind of thing, so more internal costs. And quite often, the bottleneck is not just finding the money, but it's getting resources from our technical colleagues who quite often have got a heavy workload, and if you want to install a new system, no matter how strong the business case, you can be kept waiting for weeks or months, so not good. Another sort of hidden cost of having an on-premises installation is that you, the customer, are responsible for keeping that installation up to date. All the workforce management vendors, and we're no different, produce new versions at intervals. We're producing new versions every 6 months, and they're maintained for 2 years. But this does mean that at some stage you're going to need to upgrade, and it is never as simple as just popping a CD-ROM into the server and restarting and everything works. There's always some migration work, some regression work that needs to be done to make sure that it's working properly, and that can be disruptive and costly. Finally, traditional software will incur an annual maintenance fee, which is another cost that goes out the business. So I'd like to introduce the concept of cloud workforce management now to a fair section of the audience who tick the box for hosted workforce management. We're familiar with the rough idea. Just before I go on to to drill into this a little bit further, there is an important difference between hosted and cloud. It's a bit of a technical distinction, but the difference between hosted and cloud is that with a cloud setup, you have a data center, just as with a hosted data center. But the difference is, with hosting, somewhere in the data center is a machine with your company's name on it, and it's dedicated to you, which means that you're constrained in terms of the performance and the horsepower of the hardware that's there to run your application. With a cloud setup, you've got the data center which is shared among all the customers, and you're getting a concept which is very familiar to resource planners, I think, which is the concept of pooling efficiencies. So at any one time, you have access to a large amount of computing power which you can use for a short period, for example, generating optimized schedules, and when you finish with it, you hand those resources back into the pool to be used by other customers. So this enables very high performance. It also enables those pooling efficiencies which enable us to offer our product at a very low price, and to do that in a sustainable way. So you get a great deal as a customer. We are able to run a profitable business. So I've given the game away here. Our fee is very simple. It's £9 per user per month, and that includes everything that you would need to run a workforce management system. You have access to the software, you get support and maintenance, we take care of the provisioning in the cloud of the necessary hardware, we take care of the updates. So we are actually producing updates and hot fixes continuously as we develop the product, and these are installed without any involvement by the customer, nothing for you to do. You just log in and find that all your data's there, business as usual, but the hot fixes and the new features have been applied. So,
and we do a lot of quite positive feedback, or generally positive feedback about workforce management software. We've definitely got some fans out there. Scott says the workforce management system they've used has done wonders for us. We used to use Excel, but the software has really transformed things. He says WFM systems are definitely the place to be. Marco says, yes, in my opinion, workforce management software is great. Sean has said, our workforce management software is brilliant as well. It allows us to design shifts based on our own parameters. We've got mixed results from Jeff. Jeff's just upgraded to a workforce management system and is undecided as to which is best. I guess it takes a while to get the data in before you really start getting the schedules and the forecasts going. And a final comment on this one from Andrew said, I would swear by using WFM, as I have used one for the past few years, and it helps me spend more time on other things, as once the data is input, is only a few clicks and I have a schedule and forecast done quickly. So I can spend time on other areas of my role. So some, generally speaking, some very positive feedback there.
That is very encouraging to hear, and that's sort of stealing my thunder for my next and final slide, really, is about the return on investment that you can gain from workforce management. I suppose what's different here, which is what we were alluding to with the myth, is that there are some tremendous benefits here, and it's great to hear that from the audience. But historically, there's also been a heavy cost as well. So there's still been a good cost-benefit ratio, but by introducing cloud workforce management at a very low price, you're able to jump in the water, not just dip a toe in the water, without having to go through a big capital procurement exercise. And some other benefits as well. For example, you can flex capacity as needed with a cloud setup. So a lot of our customers are outsourcers who have got contracts that are being won all the time and contracts coming to an end, so they have a varying number of agents that need to be planned. Well, with a cloud setup, you're not committed to buy a certain number forever. You can flex up when business grows, and then flex down again when contracts come to an end. Also very applicable in a seasonal business where you might have a busy period towards Christmas or over the winter if you're a utility company, something like that. So it's all about really squeezing the maximum possible return on investment. And some of the tips we were getting there from the audience are really what this slide is alluding to. I'm not proposing to read off every word on the slide there, but it's really about dramatically improving the efficiency of the schedules, so more closely aligning the supply with demand, if you like. So we've got the underlying requirement for staff that varies by time of day, that Penny was referring to, and you're minimizing those periods of idle time, minimizing the need for overtime as well by having more efficient schedules. It's about providing power tools, which I think several members of the audience alluded to, which means you can, with a couple of clicks, do the forecasting, a couple of clicks, do the scheduling, which leaves you get on with doing the more important parts of your job as a planner and a manager, which is to actually coach your teams and actually work towards better quality and customer experience.
Wonderful.
One reaction we sometimes get, and this is my last slide, is that when we tell people the price, they say, well, there must be something missing, or there must be something wrong with it. And we're always happy to explain that actually there's nothing missing, there's nothing wrong with it, and we put our money where our mouth is, if you like, by running a weekly live web demo each Friday at 11 o'clock UK time. And it is a deep dive. We take you through the complete workforce management cycle and show you how the thing works. And because it's a live session, happy to take questions from the audience. And unfortunately, tomorrow's session is now fully booked, but there's one the following Friday and future Fridays, and we're very happy to welcome everybody to join us on that.
Okay, wonderful. Well, thank you very much for that, Chris. We're now into the part of the agenda where we're going to go through top tips for workforce management. We've got a lot of top tips have come through already on the web chat, so I'll just go through a few of these now. Sharon has said we track shrinkage on a daily basis and their forecast shrinkage on a daily basis, but trend due to day and time of month. So I guess this ties in with some of the thoughts that you had, Penny.
Yeah, and that's great to do it on a daily basis. Really important not to just assume some blanket shrinkage, because there can be, you know, more of something that happens on a Monday and less on Friday and so on. So it's really important to understand what that shrinkage pattern looks like by day of the week and by hour. So that's a good tip, is to understand your shrinkage day by day.
Okay, and just a reminder is that we have got a bottle of champagne for the best tip. We'll go through all the tips from all the different formats. So if you type your tips in, you've got a pretty good chance of winning that. Okay, here's a tip from James about forecasting and scheduling, which is about reserve shifts. Reserve shifts, when utilized properly, are an effective tool in helping keeping control of overtime spend, as they help plug gaps in scheduling when shrinkage exceeds planned levels, by ensuring staff are scheduled to work where and when they are required. So, Dean, I'm not familiar with reserve shifts. How do you think they work?
It depends. On my experience is 50-50 really. It's basically almost, if I'm thinking the same way as James does, it's almost having an expectation of, if we hit, say, 10% over forecast, it's going to exceed the shrinkage we got in place, so we're going to need extra people, and you've already almost got slots of shifts already planned in, that in case we do go over, we've instantly can just go, yeah, there's a shift we need to plug that X number of people in at these slots. So it's almost planning the worst case scenario in for your normal staffing, but then also a very worst case for your, the worst case scenario ever staffing with your overtime slots already waiting, and you just basically enable them when you're ready.
Yeah.
And
here's a tip
if I could add something. Yeah, if I could add something, I think we see call centers doing that effectively, the reserve shifts, and some call centers call them one call center calls them their SWAT team, which stands for sometimes we answer telephones. So it could be the people that are doing email, or it could be people working elsewhere in the company that have recently worked in the call center, have moved to other positions, but in emergencies or a few hours a week, they come back and answer telephones for a little bit. And it's a great way, as James said, to minimize overtime, but still have that coverage, ready and at hand. I think that's a great idea.
Fabulous. We've got a tip that's come in from Richard, who said, we find that annual hours that we introduced last year has made it a lot more flexible to take annual leave, whereas holiday for a full day would not be allowed due to staffing levels. It means we can allow 1 to 2 hours off, which is sometimes all the staff member needs. This has meant also we don't end up with everybody having lots of annual leave left to take at the end of the year, which has also caused problems on its own. Chris, I guess that's quite an interesting one. I ran a workshop recently where one suggestion was actually to give annual leave in hours rather than in days, which I thought was quite an interesting one, to give flexibility just for this, if you need to attend the school play, to take a few hours off without necessarily a whole half or a whole day.
It certainly opens up much greater efficiencies because, as Richard said, if you have to take a whole day, it's bad for you as the employee, but it's also bad for the company in losing that resource for a whole period of time. Another point about annualized hours planning, of course, is that it does introduce its own challenges, may even be worthy of a webinar its own right, Jonty, just a thought.
Yeah, I think that would be certainly a very interesting one. Lots of people who do it swear by it.
Yes, absolutely.
And we've got quite a small number of the audience doing it, so it'd be interesting to drill down and see how effective it is. Good point. On quiet, and I guess on the same theme, on quieter days, let staff choose to finish early and bank the time back for planned busier periods. Is, if you like, I think a version of annualized hours. I think we talked about reserved shifts within rota already, and Mark has said WFM is a must in call centres. It saves so much time and effort. I recently moved to a company that had none, and the impact has been huge. We're now in the process of purchasing a new workforce management tool, and his tip is do not rely fully on the workforce management, but use it in conjunction with your resource team's knowledge to get the best out of it. Certainly, I think it's one of those systems where a little bit of there's still an art, I think, to using a workforce management tool. Just a couple of questions before we go through. Babak has said, is there a standard SLA in the telecom industry? I just see 80% in 60 seconds in the textbook. Penny, 60 seconds seems quite a long time to me.
Yeah, there is no industry standard. I hate the term even. Yeah, you know, number one, I think there's not a lot of good benchmarking. The companies, anyway, there's not much information, and even if there were a great process and all the industry information was compiled and so on, it really doesn't mean that just because these other call centers of a similar size do this, that it makes sense for you. So the key here is to know what you're doing, what makes sense for your company, your brand, what your budget, will allow. Ask your customers, how do you compare against the competition? So you really do just need to figure out what yours is and work to get there. But we get to ask this all the time. What is the industry standard for this? And the answer is kind of the same as well. How long is a piece of string? I mean, it depends. So.
And I guess tied into that, how about the question from Neil? How about looking at service level success rate as opposed to service level percentage? And we've got a question about how effective would that be as a measurement. I guess that ties in with your thing about looking not so much at service level, but at the number of intervals that we met the goal. Penny, I think, was quite
I think one of the keys is consistency. And as you think about your call center stakeholders and who you have to keep happy, your customers, your employees, senior management, consistency is really key there, so that customers get the same kind of experience. And so what if it's a 30-second wait versus a 20-second one? If you're delivering that consistently, hour after hour, it's better for the staff to have that consistent workload based on, good level schedules and staffing, and it's cheaper. It's more cost effective. So consistency is the key there, and that's where you need to drill down to those interval measures.
Okay, well, there's a couple more questions here. We haven't got time to answer them. I'll just pop those up on the screen, and if anyone on the chat room has an answer for them, we'll just stay on the chat line for a short while after the webinar, and we can certainly pick up on those.